I think it can be challenging to make an extremely wealthy character seem likable. In most romantic comedies, we see characters who, even when they joke about being broke, seem to be living comfortably enough. But they're almost never explicitly rich, the way that Elle Woods is in Legally Blonde. Elle Woods is, to be clear, disgustingly wealthy. She wears designer clothes, lives in a mansion, and drives a Porsche Boxster. I don't think it would be wrong to say that Elle Woods is far wealthier than virtually anyone actually watching this movie. And while Elle is hardworking, we don't get the sense that she earned her wealth, nor does her wealth come to her via a mysterious inheritance or random stroke of luck. In other words, it's difficult for the audience to identify with Elle because she has rich parents, and the majority of audiences do not. I think that's why often when we encounter comedy about women who were born into wealth, those women are the butts of the jokes.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
When I was a kid and I saw Legally Blonde for the first time, that's exactly what I expected to see. A farce that was openly hostile towards its protagonist. But instead, it's a story about a triumphant, capable, and explicitly upper-class woman. So, how does the movie manage to make us root for this character who's been raised with immense privilege, devoid of the financial challenges or pressures of our own lives? The film proposes that Elle has been subject to anti-blonde discrimination, but I think that's a pretty weak case.
Why shouldn't I? I'm discriminated against as a blonde.
You know, being a blonde is actually a pretty powerful thing. You hold more cards than you think you do.
Instead, we can root for Elle because we see her repeatedly fail to perform her wealth in a way that those around her deem acceptable. The main way that Legally Blonde alienates Elle from her wealth is by contrast with some of the other explicitly wealthy characters in the film, namely Warner and Vivian. If Elle is new money, then Warner and Vivian are old money. Very old money. Warner comes from 5 generations of US senators, meaning his family has held power going back to at least the 19th century. He and Vivian went to the same prep school and belonged to the same country club. We can even read their social class in the way that they dress. While Elle flaunts bold colors and designer logos, Warner, Vivian, and the rest of the Harvard elite are uniformed in well-tailored basics. No bright colors, no big logos, and only traditional fabrics and patterns. Although it may seem counterintuitive, this is actually the way that fashion tends to be stratified across social classes. Conspicuous consumption may once have been in vogue for the upper crust in America, but since the Great Depression, a resentment towards the upper class has made them more guarded. A single outfit may still cost more than the average American's paycheck, especially with all those layers, but this fact is never loudly broadcast because that's how you get your luggage stolen at the airport. Or, something like that. The people more likely to wear those designer logos are the people whose generational wealth doesn't stretch back far enough to harbor those same fears. Elle's wardrobe seems to proudly proclaim her wealth. This lets us know that Elle's attitude towards her wealth is that it is something that she can, and should, wear on her sleeve. So, Elle has a certain level of concern, whether conscious or not, over her own image, whereas Warner and Vivian seem content to dress in outfits that, while not uncomposed, broadcast very little, because their security in their own wealth permits them to do so. And yet, despite her best efforts, we repeatedly see Elle's displays of her own wealth fail to ingratiate her to her old money, or old money adjacent, peers at Harvard. At the start of the film, we see the authentic Elle, but, on her first day of classes, after some digs from the orientation leaders,
maybe you should check with the cruise director on the Lido deck.
She begins to edit herself. It's not like she's completely abandoned her sense of style, but now we see Elle dressed in a layered look comprising a cardigan, skirt, and dress shirt, complete with a tie.
Totally look the part.
On paper, it checks all the boxes, but Elle still sticks out like a sore thumb, and her peers and professors punish her for it. And she takes notice. The next time we see her in class, she's wearing a totally neutral gray sweater, and her hair is tightly pulled back. We also see the way that most characters in the film treat Brooke Wyndham. In many ways, Brooke represents a future version of Elle. Like Elle, she was a Delta Nu, and it's implied that she earned her wealth during her lifetime through her workout tapes, meaning, like Elle, she's new money. But despite her maturity and her innocence, she still receives very little respect from anyone besides Elle. These moments are so uncomfortable to watch because I think most of us have felt this anxiety at one time or another. That when we insert ourselves into upper-class spaces, we are not correctly executing all the nuances that would come from being born into that level of wealth. There are a few moments in the film where we almost see the characters broach this topic verbally. When Elle, wearing the iconic Playboy Bunny costume, talks to Warner at a party, he tells her,
"Come on, you're never gonna get the grades to qualify for one of those spots. You're not smart enough, sweetie."
This is an extension of their earlier, equally memorable conversation where an incredulous Warner asks Elle if she got into Harvard Law.
What, like it's hard?
Although on the surface the dialogue is framed around Elle's intelligence, this is clearly irrational, as by now Elle has demonstrated her academic aptitude. So I think rather than making a careless, rude remark, Warner is actually probing her deepest insecurity, that she simply does not belong at Harvard. Not because she isn't smart enough, but because she is not rich enough, or more precisely, she's not the right kind of rich. Compare this to the moment when Elle finally wins a compliment from Vivian. Vivian calls her classy.
And I thought that was very classy of you.
Really?
Sure.
This is perhaps the highest compliment Vivian could possibly pay Elle, because in terms of their intellect, they're equals, but only Vivian is credentialed to determine what constitutes classy behavior. I think it would be difficult to explicitly surface this anxiety in a lighthearted comedy, and that's why Elle never actually voices her feelings of class insecurity. But the outfits in this movie are almost more salient than the dialogue, and we can see in the way that Elle continues to refine her wardrobe that she is making an effort to fit in by concealing her class background. In a moment of extreme vulnerability, just after finding out that Warner is engaged to Vivian, Elle shoots off in her Porsche and comes upon the Neptune Salon, where she meets Paulette. Throughout her time on the East Coast, this is the one place where Elle seems to be most at ease. The Neptune Salon presents a stark contrast to the salon where we see Elle and her friends at the start of the film, in California. In the West Coast Salon, the decor is sleek and modern, and the technicians all wear the same uniform. That scene is also a moment of vulnerability for Elle. She's just been dumped by Warner, but she doesn't seem to find comfort in that environment. Compare that to the Neptune Salon, which has a much more dated, downscale look, and Paulette, who has a more blue-collar style, with denim on denim for days. Elle immediately opens up here, and engages very organically and earnestly with Paulette. If Elle was born into wealth, I can almost imagine that her parents weren't, and that this is the sort of place her mom used to go, and may have taken her as a kid. Speaking of Elle's parents, we don't get to spend much time with them, but I think that they too exhibit some of the same class markers that we see in Elle. On the one hand, there's her father, who's wearing an outfit that, on first blush, has some of the upper-class signifiers. Layers, a dress shirt, a martini. But we still see pink, which is Elle's most salient class signifier, and he's also wearing these shorts, which I just think look kind of ridiculous. Like, it looks like he's supposed to be emulating a tennis outfit, but he's just wearing it to casually lounge by the pool with a martini. And then there's Elle's mom, who just looks a lot like Elle. She's wearing these skin-tight, bright pink pants, and I think the sense that we're supposed to get from her few lines of dialogue is that she's a trophy wife who married into money. After all, she is the one who taught Elle the bend and snap technique for picking up men. But even without my gratuitous fanfiction backstory, there's another reason that Elle might find comfort here. At the Neptune Salon, Elle does not feel class insecure. She is visibly more wealthy than everyone else there, and therefore does not need to perform her wealth any more than she does naturally. Paulette, too, for all her insecurities about her looks, is very unself-conscious about her class. She expresses some envy towards Elle's beauty, but never towards her wealth or her performance thereof. Because Elle feels that she fits in with Paulette, we see her maintain some of her California style when she is at the salon. She continues to wear bold pinks and purples here, even as her school outfits trend towards muted tones and neutrals. So, okay, Elle Woods might not be the right kind of rich, but she's still rich, so how can we really find common ground with her? Well, apart from her sunny disposition and kind heart, I'd argue that Elle presents a fantasy of how we imagine we might dress and act if we were someday extraordinarily wealthy, plastered with designer brands and clothes that look expensive. The way Elle dresses almost makes me think of a figure like Dolly Parton, who I think has also capitalized on the appeal of dressing in wildly expensive clothes that still harken back to proletariat tastes. And as Parton herself says, it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. But despite this show of wealth, Elle is still excluded by her peers, who are one rung above her. So now, rather than being a story about a wealthy woman getting everything she wants, Legally Blonde becomes a story about a woman struggling and often failing to climb the class ladder to achieve the American dream. Because America has a very complicated class system. Even within discrete classes, there are layers. At the very top, more so than being marked by wealth, the upper class is defined by its connections and its conventional behaviors. And coming into wealth late in the game doesn't necessarily grant you those things. Just look at the difference between Elle's Harvard admission process and Warner's. While we see Elle study rigorously for the LSAT and rattle off her impressive extracurriculars, Vivian reveals that Warner was waitlisted and his father had to make a call to get his acceptance. This is an advantage that is not afforded to most people, who must simply make do with hard work and sheer luck. And despite her wealth, it does not seem that that leg up was afforded to Elle either. I want to emphasize that I'm not saying that Elle Woods had a really rough life, or that her performance of wealth is somehow more moral or acceptable than Warner's. It's just different. But it's different in a way that, for better or for worse, resonates with us. Because there is something money can't buy in America for any of us. Class.